afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our general election debate. There's a real buzz about this, and it's a very exciting election we've got coming up. So we've been very lucky that all the 5 candidates for the Southam Kenilworth constituency have offered to join us for this. And I know there's lots of questions to ask, so I'll introduce them first, and we'll start with the first question without any delay. On my far right is Rob Ballantyne. He is the Green Party candidate. Rob, who's your political inspiration then?
Well, I first got interested in green politics when I read a book by George Monbiot, who writes in The Guardian. It was entitled Heat, and it's all about global warming and the challenges that we face. And really, once I'd read that, I realised that we really need to do something much more radical than we're doing at the moment. Yeah, so that's why I got involved with the Greens.
Thank you. To his left is Bally Singh. He is the Labour candidate for the Southam Kenilworth. Who was your inspiration into politics?
Thank you, Matthew. Interesting one. I think for me, people who inspire me are those that have changed events in history. So, for example, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Clement Attlee, NHS, Winston Churchill, and Barack Obama. I helped out in the Obama campaign in 2008. It was inspirational just to see the appetite there for change, for something different. So they're the politicians that inspire me.
Thank you. To my right is Jeremy Wright, who is the current MP. He's the Conservative candidate. Jeremy, do you have any inspirations in politics?
Yeah, lots. But I suppose the first one was actually Abraham Lincoln. Not exactly a recent politician, but in my view, an example to us all, because his allies all thought he was too moderate and his enemies all thought he was too extreme. Probably means he was almost exactly right.
So you're a pragmatist?
I'm a pragmatist.
Okay. Thank you. On my left is Richard Dixon. He's the Lib Dem candidate for this area. Richard, do you have any inspirations, inspiring figures?
I have an inspiration. I doubt very much anybody will ever have met this man. Somebody called Ken Bon-Chuth. He's Cambodian. I was working for an international charity at the time and was out in the killing fields outside Phnom Penh. Ken Bon-Chuth had survived the horrors of the Khmer Rouge and the genocide, and was wanting to rebuild his country and transform communities. And the passion with which he conveyed that to me, I brought back to this country, and I thought, gosh, if all the poverty and suffering that he and his country have gone through, I come back here, if only I could help bring some of that back to this country. So somebody called Ken Bon-Chuth.
Thank you. And finally, to the left is Harry Cotton, who is the UKIP candidate. Harry, who is your inspiration?
Well, my inspiration, in keeping with my party, I thought I'd make the most controversial one, Margaret Thatcher. The reason being that she took what were very unpopular decisions very often in the 1980s. They turned out in many cases to be the right ones, and she got a lot of flack for making those decisions. But she knew the course she was taking, she knew which direction she was headed, and I have admiration for any politician who takes that stance rather than taking the whatever's the most popular stance at the time.
Thank you. So, without further ado, we have a first question which comes from Leah Glatbach. Where's Leah?
How much do you think of university education should cost?
Okay, so the first question is, how much should a university education cost? So reference to the tuition fees and the cost of university for students going to university. Bally Singh.
Thank you. Thank you for the question there. In terms of how much should a university cost, I think Labour's made a commitment to reduce tuition fees to £6,000. That's fully costed. We think it's the right thing to do to encourage more people to go to university. That will reduce actually £40 billion of debt on our books by 2030. It will reduce individual debt by £9,000. It's all fully funded and costed because it will come out of pension tax relief for those incomes that are above £150,000. Now think about this, those pension relief for those incomes that are above £150,000 applies to just 1% of people, but they account for 7% of all pension tax relief. So we will make sure that it's a fair funding formula, so their pension tax relief is equal to the average for pension tax relief, which is 20%. Ultimately, university is an investment, not only in yourself, but in the country. So there needs to be shared costs as well. So the reduction in terms of the fee from £9,000 to £6,000, we will pay for with an equivalent grant to universities. but we'll also make sure that middle and lower income families benefit from a £400 top-up in their grant to £3,800. Ultimately, what we want to do is to encourage as many people as possible to participate in the education system, so you can achieve your dreams, you can achieve your aspirations. You're all here as future leaders of our country. We need you to contribute, and we need to do as much as we can to support you, because in the end, that's a benefit to all the country, it's a benefit to Kenilworth and Southam, it's a benefit to all our communities. So in terms of cost, it's all fully funded, and we think it's less of a cost and more of an investment in the future.
But do you think it's really going to have an impact by dropping fees from £9,000 to £6,000? I mean, over the terms of a university career, and you're paying it off over a long period, is that really going to have that much of a difference on the sort of monthly payments for people? Because under the new scheme, someone who earns average salary actually pays less monthly than under the scheme that Labour introduced, which was £3,000. So how much is that actually going to make a difference?
Well, you talk about the cost. The present loan book for the student fees is absolutely it's in default. The previous minister set up parliamentary select committee that the raising of the fees to £9,000 meant that the loan book was in default. And what that meant was that the actual gain that they thought they would receive from increasing it to £9,000 has been minimalised. So rather than make a loan book unaffordable and increase our debts by £40 billion by 2030, we want to reduce that, make the loan system more affordable and make it more equitable and more fair, to encourage more people to go into higher education if they can, to achieve their dreams and their aspirations. And we will do that in a fair way. And I think this is the test. Because in the last election in 2010, what happened was there was a promise made to reduce tuition fees. And that appealed to a lot of students. But actually, it came across as the worst of politics, because what happened was a promise was made, then after the election, the promise was taken away. And cynicism in politics increased. And that only benefits those vested interests that like the way that things are. We want to change business as usual. We want to challenge those vested interests. We want to make life better for the next generation. And that's our promise. We will make sure that life for the next generation is better than the last. So we will invest in the future.
Okay, thank you. Richard.
How much should university cost is an interesting question, because that's a slightly different question to what do I think of tuition fees per se. I'd like to begin by saying, actually, particularly in a constituency like Kenilworth and Southam, the university sector, tertiary education, is incredibly important. It's one of the biggest employers, Warwick University and Coventry University. To us, and having a properly funded tertiary education sector is absolutely vital. It brings in thousands of overseas students. It's a big export earner for us. Going back to the question, if you're asking, do I think the level should be 6,000, 9,000, 3,000, or absolutely nothing, which is the situation north of the border in Scotland, then yes, the Liberal Democrats pledged, if you read our 2010 manifesto on page 38 or 39, said that if we'd been running the country, we would have sought by the end of the Parliament, i.e. now, to have done away with tuition fees which had been introduced by the previous Labour administration. The coalition agreement, which was negotiated in the few days after the election not giving any one party that could actually run the country on its own, is a coalition agreement. It's a marriage. That involves compromise. One of those compromises, as far as Liberal Democrats was concerned, was that the government would wait for the Brown report to come out in the autumn of 2010.
Yeah, but Nick Clegg signed something saying if we're in government, we won't raise tuition fees. We understand the idea of a coalition sort of having to barter over different decisions. And actually, Labour never mentioned anything about tuition fees in the 2010 manifesto. And although you did make a promise, other parties didn't. But they signed to say that fees wouldn't be changed or wouldn't be increased. So,
well, it wasn't. Actually, it wasn't just Nick Clegg. There was almost all Liberal Democrat candidates signed a pledge that said that if they were running the country, this would be something that by the end of the Parliament we would have got rid of tuition fees. Should we have signed that pledge? Abby hindsight probably says not. Do I think £9,000 is the right level given the fact that the threshold at which people start repaying it has been lifted to £21,000? If you look at what's been happening, the number of students applying to university, particularly from less well-off backgrounds, has actually gone up since the tuition fees was introduced. So it hasn't affected the number of people wanting to go to university. Do I think it should stay where it is? Yes, I do think it should stay where it is.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, I agree with what Richard's just said. I think it should stay where it is, and he makes the right point that if you look at what's happened in applications to university, there's no evidence to suggest that the level of fees where they are is putting off the people we should most worry about putting off from university. But I think actually, the question is about what a university education costs, and the truth is a university education costs more than the level of fees at the moment. So there is already a subsidy from the taxpayer to every university undergraduate, and in my view, quite right too. I think we all benefit as a society from better educated people. Those people go on to contribute to society later. So I think it is right that society subsidises a university education, but I don't think it's right that society as a whole should pay the whole cost of that university education. Because if you look at what the earning potential is of somebody who has a degree compared to someone who doesn't, it's very clear that if you have a university degree, it adds somewhere between £150,000 to £250,000 to your career-long earnings. So there's a very obvious benefit to everybody who wants to go to university, and I agree with Barry on this. I think it's an investment in the future, an investment in our collective future, but also, crucially, an investment in everyone's individual future. The most important thing for me is under what circumstances are we asking people to pay that money back? Because we need to be very clear, this is not £21,000 up front at the beginning of your university education. If it was, then that of course would be putting off a lot of people who wouldn't feel they could pay that. It's not that. What it's saying is that when you get, as Richard says, to earning £21,000 a year, you should start to pay that money back. And of course, some people never get to that level of earnings, and some people never get to the point where they pay off the full £9,000. And the problem, I'm afraid, with what Valley is suggesting, attractive though I understand it sounds, is that actually the people who end up paying more than £6,000 are in fact the people who end up earning quite a lot of money. They're the people who will benefit from what the Labour Party is proposing. Those who are on low incomes and stay that way, they won't benefit from what he's suggesting at all. So I think let's keep the level as it is, but let's keep focused on the need to make sure that people can repay in ways that they can afford.
I think though, for many young people, the fees issue is, many of them, we've done a survey of the students, and actually the vast majority of them, over 80% felt that some level of fees is acceptable. I don't think many students feel that paying no fees. I think one of the feelings is actually that there's a sort of disproportionate amount of the balancing of the budget is happening to young people. So many young people feel, well, actually, if you look at other things that the government retains, such as free TV licence for pensioners, winter fuel payment universally, but young people are facing the brunt, they're not getting much more invested back in them. Yet older people aren't having the same hit. So actually there's a principle thing here. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that you've always got to try and strike a balance. All I'd say is the difference, of course, is that older people who are getting these benefits have already paid into the pot, if you like, and they don't have the capacity to earn any more money once they've retired. What I'm saying about young people, particularly those who go to university, is that the evidence is very clear. You've got the capacity to earn quite a lot more, actually, and quite right too. But that means you need to pay some of that benefit back for the subsidy that you've already received. So, yes, of course we should do more to help young people. We may have the chance to come on to these things a little bit later. We should be doing more to help young people get into employment. We should be doing more to help people get apprenticeships with good quality. We should be doing more to help young people afford their first home. And we're doing all of those things, and we can go into some detail if we have time. But in terms of higher education, you must be realistic about this. It's an investment in your future, and investments cost money. And it means that we have to share that cost between the taxpayer and the individual who's going to get quite a lot of benefit out of it too.
Okay, I'm going to ask you your opinions in a minute, so please raise your hands. And I'm going to come back to Leah as well for what Leah thinks about what's been said. Rob?
Yeah, well, the Green Party policy on this is very clear. We would abolish tuition fees altogether. They do it in Germany, they do it in Holland, they do it in Denmark, so I don't see why we can't do it here. I benefited from a free university education in the 70s, and I'm not going to sit up here and say that I've had it free, but you've got to pay. Just coming back to something that Jeremy said about the increased earnings of graduates, even taking the lower end of that scale, say 150,000 extra income over your lifetime, even at the basic rate, you would pay £30,000 of that in tax. So in effect, you've already paid for your
net tax. 150 net tax.
Well, even more then. So you will have paid for your tuition fees by the extra tax that you pay. So whichever way you look at it, I can't see where we can justify tuition fees at all.
So how's that costed then? Where would the money come? Because what was being said was the actual cost of education is much more than the £9,000 spent. So where would the costing come from? Where would the money come for this?
Well, it would have to come out of taxation. I mean, again, it's Germany, Holland, Netherlands. They have higher rates of tax and national insurance than we do in this country. We've made a choice in this country to have low tax and poor public services, and I think some people would rather have it the other way around.
Okay, Harry.
Yes, the implication behind the question is how much should the university education cost the person undergoing the university education? Now, to answer that question, I would say firstly one has to take into account that the number of people actually attending university in this country has gone up incrementally over the last 20-30 years, very substantially. A very substantial portion of the country now go to university, whereas 20-30 years ago, when there were no such thing as students paying for tuition fees, in those days there was a much lower proportion of the population going to university. So therefore the overall cost to the country was that much less than it is now. And therefore the reasoning of government for tuition fees is that if they are charged, that will assist the government in terms of, or the governmental bodies in terms of providing large-scale university education.
It was very elitist, though, how you refer to the past. I mean, students like this from a comprehensive school, a far smaller number went before the past. So although there's this vision of a smaller number...
I'm setting the background. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with that policy, but that is the reasoning. UKIP policy is what is most value to this country? What is best in terms of investment in this country, in terms of education? And UKIP consider that the hard reality of life is that some degrees are of greater value to this country and its future needs than others. A medicine degree, a degree in science, engineering, is going to be of far greater value in terms of investment in this country than a philosophy degree or maybe a media studies.
Just bear in mind, many of these are applying to university at the moment.
So, I really, as I say, I'm not here seeking to pander to anybody here. As far as I'm concerned, I'm telling what I consider to be the truth. If there are a large number of students studying degrees which really, in the end, are not going to assist them in their careers in later life, then if those students wish to study those subjects, all well and good, but why should the government fund the tuition fees? We are effectively advocating abolishing tuition fees for science degrees, for engineering degrees, for medicine degrees, so that encourages what is needed, which is a much greater uptake of those degrees. And I would include in the degrees that are not so necessary for the country a law degree, and I speak as a lawyer because I know there are too many lawyers in this country, because I see numerous, as an employer, I see numerous CVs come unsolicited on my desk, and it's very sad that there are so many well-qualified prospective trainee solicitors looking for work and not finding it because there are too many lawyers.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back to Leah. Where's Leah? Do you want to see? Leah, what do you think from what you've heard and what your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that the focus should be on how much it costs, so 9,000 or whatever a year. I think the focus should be on how to help families get their children through university. So maintenance loans, like if a household income is over £45,000 a year, why does that mean that they have to have less help than others? It doesn't mean that they can get their children through university easier, because everyone struggles. But I just think that should be the focus, not on whether it's 9,000 or 6,000 or nothing. Anyway.
Thank you. Any other views? Anyone else want to make a point? Yes, that's here, yeah.
This is to say, you said that the last Parliament took away a promise. What's to ensure that Labour, when they get into power, won't take away that promise as well?
Okay, I think we'll take that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I think just look at our records. We promised Ed Miliband and the Labour Party went out on a limb to challenge the Murdoch empire. Nobody else did that. We took the flak. We take the flak every day in all of the tabloid newspapers. Every day we get the flak for that decision. Was that the right decision? Yes, it was, because it needed to happen.
Well, your record on fees, you say about your record, but
yeah.
In 1999 when fees were introduced, that wasn't in the 97 manifesto. When fees were increased to £3,000, that wasn't in the manifesto. And in 2010 there was nothing mentioned in the manifesto about fees. So about the fees, the record, maybe the Murdoch record, but specifically about fees, the record.
The question is whether we deliver on our promises.
Yeah.
We delivered on our promise to challenge Murdoch. We'll deliver on our promises not to go into war into Syria. We'll deliver on our promises to freeze and cut utility bills. We'll deliver on our policy to cut tuition fees. And if you look at that question, how much should a university education cost? See, I'm like a half-full kind of guy. I look at the positive end of things and to be progressive. And really the question should be, how much will it cost our country not to invest in your future? So hands up those who are tending to go to university. Hands up. Okay? How much do you think? Hands up if you think you going to university will benefit the country. So the question is, how much would it cost not to invest in all of your futures? And that's the promise we make. We make a pledge as the Labour Party to make sure that the next generation does better than the last. That's our promise to you. That's why I'm standing as your candidate for Kenilworth and Southam.
Do you have any views from the audience? Anyone else want to say? Yes, Lucy.
Mr. Coughlin, you said that there'll be more tuition fees for those who pick sciences and other stuff at universities.
Yeah. So the point about making fees more for you who weren't doing science or a degree like that.
But also the thing is perhaps encouraging more children to take creative subjects at university. Because for a long time, even though the English and economics being scrapped, I think more children should be persuaded into encourage subjects like drama, music, art. So I think there should be more ways of paying tuition fees to those.
Well, my response to that is that we all have to sort of envisage a situation if our party was either a part of or in government. And governments have to make hard and unpopular decisions, and they have to consider. I mean, it's no good being in the land in what I consider to be the Green Party fairyland, for instance, where everybody, where the taxpayer is paying for absolutely everything, and nobody really knows the cost of anything. It's not like that in the real world. In the real world, it is a question of having to decide what to invest in, and I believe, and my party believes, that hard decisions have to be made, and the degrees I mentioned are going to be of more economic benefit. And I'm not saying that of more benefit overall, but of more economic benefit to the country than degrees where the reality is that they're not going to lead to relevant jobs in those areas.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got two things to say about that. I did degree in philosophy and politics, and I'm sure that Harry would regard that as being totally useless for any sort of career. Well, I've followed quite a successful career in accountancy, and a lot of that has been due to the disciplines I learned in doing my philosophy and politics degree. So it doesn't have to be specific to the career that you're going to follow. The next thing I'll say is that I know that Germany perhaps isn't your favourite country, but I don't think even you would accuse them of living in cloud cuckoo land when they can provide free education for students.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy.
No one's ever accused me before of being in green fairyland, but I have to say I'm with Rob on this one. The truth is that there are people with philosophy degrees, people with classics degrees, people with drama degrees running the country right now, and it's not about the subject that you study, it's what you get from the course of study, the disciplines you learn, the way your mind starts to work that's of use later, and that should be encouraged. The only other thing I want to say is I don't think we should lose sight in this debate about university tuition fees of the other options that you have. I think one of the mistakes that governments over the past few years of all political colours have made is to suggest to people your age that the only good thing you can do when you leave school is go to university. I think that's profoundly wrong.
You mentioned before, though, that the university rates have increased, even though the fees go. Surely that's actually a consequence of the fact there aren't any jobs for young people to go. So many students are investing in education, and although we've encouraged them, actually, that's the reality now.
No, it's not the reality now, and actually youth unemployment has come down dramatically in the last few years, so it's certainly better than it was. But what I'm about to talk about is not either university degrees or straight into employment, but apprenticeships. And I don't think we should lose sight of apprenticeships. Hugely important. You've got another set of options here, and you should consider those options very carefully. 2 million new apprenticeships over the last 5 years, and if my party's in government after the election, 3 million more. Apprenticeships are ways in which you can learn a skill or a number of skills. You can do it while you're being paid something. You can work for some of the biggest companies in the country. I was with some apprentices last week during National Apprenticeship Week, some of whom working for Siemens, Rolls-Royce, Jaguar Land Rover. Great opportunities. Let's not lose sight of that and pretend that the only option available is a university degree.
Obviously, the question is about fees, so we're just going to go to Richard, then we're going to move on to the next question, Richard.
Well, 2 points that I just wish to follow up on from what Harry was saying. You raised a very important question, way outside the field of education and tuition fees. Actually, what is the role of government? And I'm sorry, I don't believe that the role of government is just to make hard and tough decisions. The role of government is to build up this thing called the common good. And that involves what is best for society. And yes, that may involve some hard decisions, but it's trying to look across the whole breadth of communities that exist, rather than just looking and say, what's the economic benefit, and therefore we'll favour people who are doing science, technology, economics and maths. The only thing I would say is, I can remember, and I'm sure some of you do, an episode of West Wing, where it was suggested the one category of student who should have their tuition fees paid were those going into teaching.
Okay, thank you. Right.
Could I just add one thing?
Yeah.
On a very personal note, I did a law degree, and I would therefore rule out my own degree from that. But would I do it at 18? Would I rule it out at 18? Probably not.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we're moving to the second question, which comes from Callum Unit. Callum.
Would the 40 to 80 billion pounds being sent on HS2 be better invested in the NHS?
Thank you. So the question is about, would the 40 to 80 billion, it's proposed as 40 billion, but many have said it might cost up to 80 billion, being spent on H2, be better spent on the National Health Service? Jeremy Wright.
Shouldn't be either or, and we should spend more on the NHS. We are spending more on the NHS, about 12 billion over the last 5 years. We need to spend more, and that's simply because there is more demand, more people are surviving longer, which is a good thing. We're finding more cures for more diseases, which is a good thing, more drugs, more treatments. All of those things have to be paid for, and we should put the money in to pay for them. So it's not a choice between those two things. But we should also recognise that it's not even a choice between spending money on HS2 and spending money on other forms of transport. We've got to continue to invest in those, even if we have HS2, and we're doing that. So, for example, not very far from here, junction 12 of the M40 is being upgraded at the moment near Gaydon. That's important for our road network. We're going to have a new station at Kenilworth. That's important for the rail network. Investment needs to continue and is continuing in the conventional networks as well as in high speed. But on high speed specifically, I think there is a good argument for a high speed rail network. Not incidentally just a line between London and Birmingham. It's got to extend much further than that and connect up all our cities. And the argument is that it is better to move people around the country on a fast train than on a short haul flight, for example, or even by car on the motorways. So if we can move people onto those high-speed railways, there's a real transport benefit. The best way to do that, in my view, is to make sure that the high-speed railway lines that you build are running along existing transport corridors, by which I mean either motorways or railway lines that are already there. If you do that, you cause a lot less blight. That is not what HS2 does at the moment, as you're all uncomfortably aware. And my argument is, and always has been, that if there is an argument for high-speed rail, and I believe there is, the most effective way to deliver high-speed rail is along those existing transport corridors.
Okay. Just to pick up on the health issue, you said £12 billion more invested in health in this Parliament. Isn't that just the rate of inflation? So there hasn't been really a real terms increase. And secondly, a lot of economists reckon there's going to be a 20 billion shortfall. So in the next Parliament, if this money is being spent on HS2, surely that would be better spent on health.
No, as I say, it's not either or, and we do have to keep pace, not just with inflation, but make real terms increases. And actually, the 12 billion is ahead of inflation. It is a real terms increase for the NHS, and there will be a real terms increase for the NHS after the election too. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you can leave the NHS entirely alone, because it has to be as efficient as it can be. So the money we put in at the top doesn't just drain out at the bottom, but all of it goes to frontline patient care, and that means less managers in the NHS, more doctors, more nurses. We've done that too. But these are not either-or choices. The government spends, believe it or not, about £700 billion every year, and it can afford to spend money on more than one thing, and it has to spend more on more than one thing. So these are not either-or choices. They are decisions to be taken about whether, in transport policy terms, it is the right thing to do to build a high-speed rail network. And as I said, I think there's a good argument for that. And I suspect other people on the panel, that they may not admit it, would agree with that. But it doesn't mean that we can accept or should accept HS2 in precisely the form it's in now.
Thank you, Richard.
To go back to the question, should we be spending money on HS2, which, according to the most recent estimates, is somewhere in the region of £53 billion, or spending that money on the NHS? I'm married to a local community midwife. She would love me to say that we should be spending the money on the NHS. Actually, the HS2 money comes out of your capital budget, and your NHS money comes out of your current account budget in broad terms, except when you're building hospitals, accepted. So it's not quite as simple as that. Having said that, on HS2, the vast majority of people in Kenilworth and Southam who I have met for the last 5 years do not want HS2 coming through this constituency. I walked the route, as some of you may have seen, from east of Ladbroke through Bascott Heath and Covington and Offchurch last Wednesday, because it was the 5th anniversary of the original announcement by the then Labour Minister, Lord Adonis. Yes, my party supports high-speed rail. Yes, it supports HS2, and I've spent 5 years trying to persuade other constituency chairmen, other MPs, particularly those in the southwest, who do not like the prospect of investing in HS2 phase 1 here, phase 2 going further north, because they think, rightly in my view, that actually it will mean less investment into the southwest. The job of an MP is to represent the needs of his constituents. When the vast majority of your constituents are saying, we do not want HS2, I think as your MP should have voted against HS2 when it came to the second reading on the 28th of April last year. I would have done that. And although the debate isn't completely over yet, even next week in the Palace of Westminster, there's going to be a debate on HS2. So I don't think it's completely a done deal at the moment.
So what do you think about the principle of it then? Aside from the sort of the coming through this constituency, oppose the principle of a high-speed rail link that's been proposed from London to Birmingham principle?
Well, what is the principle here? When it was initially launched, it was all around the fact that it would save us 10, 15, 20 minutes off a journey from Birmingham down to London Euston, and then for those going on to Europe, you'd have to go down the Euston Road to get onto HS1, the two not connecting, somewhat bizarrely. The principle now is not about time saving, because we all know that we've got mobile technology, whether it's tablets or laptops or iPads or phones. So for business people, it's not wasted time, because you can do other stuff whilst you're taking a slightly longer train journey going down from Birmingham to London. We already have, in my view, Chiltern Railways and the West Coast Main Line intercity going down into London Euston anyway. So HS2 is not about saving time, it's about capacity, and mainly it's a freight capacity issue. And I'm not so sure that necessarily means that you need high-speed rail. You need extra rail capacity in order to be putting the freight, off the roads onto the railways.
Okay, thank you. Rob?
Yeah, well, the Green Party line on this is, again, very simple. We would scrap HS2 because it's a massive waste of money. You say it's an issue of capacity. Yes, it would increase capacity, but not by anywhere near as much if you spend that money on improving the existing railway network, as I think Richard has just been describing. The problem that Richard has, obviously, is that although he may be against HS2, his party isn't. And that's true of the main three parties at Westminster. And yes, I do believe it would be better spent on the NHS and building more hospitals. So,
how would we solve that? Because we clearly do have a disparity between London and most of the north of the country, and one of the ideas of HS2 is just to help spread the disparity as well. So how would the Greens do that then?
well, I don't think it does. I think it concentrates even more wealth into London, because I don't believe there's going to be millions of people commuting from London to Birmingham, but there are going to be plenty commuting from Birmingham to London. I also don't think that it actually replaces short-haul air flights. I mean, you look what happened with the Channel Tunnel. I'm not saying I'm against the Channel Tunnel, but you don't see all the ferry companies closing down. The ferry companies are still operating. So I think the short-haul flights would still operate as well. All you're doing is increasing, giving different ways of getting from Birmingham to London.
Okay, thank you. Just back to Callum. Callum, what are your views on HS2? If you'd like to just tell us what you think about this.
Well, I'm very, very firmly against HS2 personally, because I think it's a large amount of money we're spending concentrated in one area, and also it's not really going to be of any benefit to our constituency here. Here it's of no benefit to us whatsoever. We suffer the consequences, we lose houses, businesses, countryside, farmland, and we don't get any of the benefits of this railway.
Surprised to know, on opposite ends of the political spectrum, the Green Party and UKIP are in agreement on this issue, in total agreement. We believe in UKIP this project is a complete white elephant, it's a total waste of money, it's under budgeted now, the eventual cost is going to be far greater than the current budget. All those that have any expertise in this issue agree on that. Your current MP voted for this project.
No, just to clarify, he abstained.
He certainly
Abstained,
didn't vote
so it's
against.
not the same as voting for.
He certainly didn't vote against. So as far as I'm concerned, this project is a total waste of public money, and UKIP would invest the money. We'd be perfectly happy to invest the money in the National Health Service. It is a misnomer to suggest that UKIP are against greater public expenditure. We believe in targeted public expenditure where there is need.
Okay.
So yeah, I would totally be against this project.
I think a few things you'd like to say.
I did, yeah.
Said just come to Bally, yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jeremy. Callum, I'll tackle this in three ways, but you made a really interesting point about representing your constituency and your constituents here in Southam and in Kenilworth. And actually, this will be a disaster for this area. It's going to cut up land. It's not going to reduce journey times in any significant form, and it is a big waste of money in terms of the current proposals. And what I would do if I'm elected as your constituency MP, I would actually represent constituents in Southam and Kenilworth. So I make a commitment here in front of you now that I won't go for a government or ministerial career. I will back the constituency interests in Southam and Kenilworth, and I will vote against these current proposals for HS2. Now, Jeremy made an interesting point yesterday, and he said part of his decision was informed by his ministerial career because it would be put at risk. And that's something that Jeremy has to confront himself. In his heart, he knows HS2 is wrong in this area, but because of his career aspirations, he's not able to make that decision. So therefore, he abstains. On the second point, the NHS, the Labour government are committed to a fully funded NHS. So that means 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more GPs, GP appointments within 48 hours, cancer tests within 1 week, and an integrated strategy for health and social care from cradle to grave. And the Labour Party founded the NHS. We will re-energise the NHS with a fully funded strategic approach. And on the third point, about the cost of HS2, £80 billion. We were just told in the first question that we couldn't afford to invest in your future. Now we're told we can afford £80 billion for HS2. I can't make sense of that.
I think a lot's been said about your opinion, Jeremy, so I think we'll
we actually are. Let's confront this issue of voting in the House of Commons and my ministerial career, first of all. As Barry says, when people ask me a straight question, I try and answer it straightly. And when people say to me, well, did you think about whether you'd have to abandon your ministerial career if you were going to vote against HS2, you wouldn't believe me if I said, no, it wouldn't be true. Of course I thought about that. But I also have to think about what would be in the best interests of my constituents. And those up here who've said to you it's important for members of Parliament to represent their constituents are right. And of course I've been able to do that by putting forward their views. There are a range of views among my 65,000 constituents on a range of subjects. I don't agree with them all. I couldn't. But I do put forward the views that they hold.
But the best way you can put those forward is by voting.
Right, well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Let's think about that one for a minute. At the second reading of this bill, so every piece of legislation goes through several stages in Parliament. This was the first of them. It's got a few more to go. At the second reading of this bill, it passed Parliament with a majority of 411. Had I voted against it instead of abstaining, it would have passed with a majority of 410. Now bear in mind, what I said to you at the beginning of this section is what I think about HS2. It's what I thought about HS2 when I asked for people's votes in 2010. It's still what I think about HS2. I've never said that I'm against high-speed rail because I'm not. And I think what your Member of Parliament ought to do is stick to what they promised to do. And what I promised to do was to argue for a different route for HS2. I'm still doing that. And I think that's the promise you should expect me to keep. If I'd left the government, and it certainly was an option, and I thought very carefully about whether I ought to do that, HS2 would still be here, HS2 would still be following the route that it's following, and all that would have happened is you would have a Member of Parliament without influence in the government instead of a Member of Parliament with influence.
I think